Again, we are recording this so that we will share this out to our network afterwards. But I want to make sure that we have enough time, and I'm going to introduce Wendy Block with the Michigan Chamber of Commerce. She is also a liaison for the Reopen Michigan Safely, which is a coalition that we at the Battle Creek Area Chamber of Commerce are a part of. So I'm going to turn it over to Wendy because she has a lot of really great information. We did hear from the governor yesterday that we were at 55% of Michiganders have been vaccinated. So the pieces is now supposedly 2 weeks from today, we can open up businesses for in-office work. But I'm sure Wendy has some insight on what that actually means. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Wendy.
Great. Thanks, Kara. And thank you for the opportunity to be here today. We appreciate the partnership we have with the Battle Creek Area Chamber and just your involvement in the Reopen Michigan Safely campaign and just kind of the whole debate about lifting some of these restrictions as other states do so and as our numbers continue to improve. So I'm going to jump right into it. I'm sure most of you saw that last week the governor kind of moved away from the metrics that they had been looking at, which were primarily positivity rates, hospitalization rates, and death rates, and moved to this new vaccination metric that they're calling VAC to normal. And that VAC to normal plan outlines a 4-step process for lifting the restrictions and more fully opening the economy. The first step actually was met yesterday, and it had looked like late last week that it was going to be some time before we would hit that first 55% mark. But we heard late on Friday that they actually had been not counting a number of populations when they launched that plan, including veterans, people vaccinated in other states, and a few other populations, prisoners primarily. And so we jumped from about 49% to 55% over the course of the weekend and into yesterday. So the announcement yesterday is now that 55% of Michiganders have been vaccinated. So that's about 4.453 million residents. And in 2 weeks' time, on May 24, that means that we will, as a state, be allowing in-person work for all sectors of businesses. So that should trigger the lifting of the MIOSHA emergency rule related to in-person work, which specifies an employer shall create a policy prohibiting in-person work for employees to the extent that their work activities can feasibly be completed remotely. This is something we at the Michigan Chamber and the Battle Creek Chamber as well have been calling for a lifting of for quite some time now, almost 2 months. Michigan is the only state in the nation that we can identify that has a ban on in-person work from a statewide perspective. There are some local jurisdictions around the country that have used these over the course of the last year or so, but really nothing as sweeping as this in other states. We'll talk a little bit about here in a second about now that we've hit this 55% mark, what does that mean for the permanent rules that MIOSHA is working to promulgate or put into effect, and kind of how we expect this ban on in-person work to potentially evolve. There's still some questions regarding how does that play out and what does that exactly look like. So next on the governor's kind of list is step 2, which requires 60% of Michiganders, or about 4.858 million residents, to be vaccinated. And when we hit that 60% mark, plus 2 weeks, so they're allowing, the vaccine to take full hold for people to be fully vaccinated. It would increase the indoor capacity at sports stadiums. It increases the indoor capacity at conference centers and banquet halls and funeral homes. Both of those would go to 25%. It would increase capacity at gyms and exercise facilities to 50% and lift the curfew on restaurants and bars. We're not quite sure when we might hit this mark. It may be a month, it may be longer. The vaccination rates definitely have slowed since they first were rolled out earlier this year. And so the question really becomes, does that even further taper out or not? And so the 60% mark, I think most people feel like is achievable and probably will happen here yet late this spring or early summer. Phases 3 and 4, steps 3 and 4 are 65% and 70%. I think there is a lot of questions about whether or not Michigan can reach those 2 percentage marks. 65% definitely is a stretch goal. That would be about 5.262 million residents plus 2 weeks. If we were to hit 65%, that would lift all indoor capacity limits, requiring only social distancing between parties, and it would further relax limits on residential social gatherings, which of course are hard to enforce. And then finally, at that 70% mark, which would be just under 5.7 million residents, they would lift the gatherings and face mask orders that DHHS have put into place. And so that would allow, kind of unlimited gatherings, kind of back to normal, no more face masks, that sort of thing. With all of these, they put a caveat on that they could move backward if the spread of vaccine resistance variants pops up and they can't get control over those. So each one of these could be moved back. When they wrote the order, it kind of seems like it only applies to the 70% step, but it really applies to all of the steps we've learned since they issued this. So, in general, I think there's some positive news here with the lifting on the ban on office work and that we're moving in the right direction. But there are serious questions that remain about, kind of whether we can meet the stretch goals that have been laid out and what happens if we can't. We do think that at the Michigan Chamber that a more holistic view of COVID is needed when we talk about restrictions, that we have kind of now moved the goalpost, if you will, on some of this. And, the difficulty here is that you're asking people to take personal medical decisions and to tie them to the activities and those choices and the lifting of restrictions. And so the question will be whether this incentivizes people to get vaccinated or actually pushes people who are hesitant or already a no into being a hard no. And so time will kind of tell what happens there. As you may know, there's also kind of something parallel that's going on here as it relates to the Michigan Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or MIOSHA, working to promulgate permanent rules. So temporary rules, emergency rules have been in place since October of this year. Under the statute, MIOSHA has the authority to issue emergency rules, and they can do so on a 6-month basis. So they issued them on October 14. They were set to expire on April 14, but the statute allows them to renew those rules one time only for up to another 6-month period. They have gone ahead and done so. So the emergency rules are now in effect through October, unless they decide to take proactive action to rescind any of those rules. And these rules are kind of less talked about, but they really govern the workplace. So these are unlike the MDHHS rules that govern kind of your everyday person's behavior and customers and that sort of thing. These really govern the employer-employee relationship. So this is where you get your preparedness and response plan requirements, your daily health screening requirements, your requirements that if employees are in the office that they have to wear masks if they can't be, if they're going to be close to each other, the enhanced cleaning protocols that are there, and more. The governor's office has instructed MIOSHA, though, to consider promulgating or to move forward with promulgating permanent rules that can slide into place when the emergency rules expire in October. And so MIOSHA has now been working for over a month to develop permanent rules. These are now on the table. They've been out for a couple weeks now. There is going to be a public hearing on May 26th on these, and that is the first step towards making those rules permanent. What the rules really do, the permanent rules do, is they take the emergency rules and they kind of nibble around the edges in terms of changes, but basically codify what the emergency rules and make them permanent. The concerns that we have with those rules and we have been opposed on is that they take the in-person work requirement, which of course we just talked about how that's going away, but they actually suggest that all employers need to have a policy promoting remote work for all employees. The question becomes, how does this mesh with the governor's announcement yesterday that they are going to lift the ban on in-person work? The question we've had, and we haven't gotten a good answer to it at this point, is whether they're going to lift it altogether and say, we're not going to kind of put our thumb on these decisions whatsoever, or do they lift it and replace it with a requirement that employers need to have a policy promoting remote work for all employees? What we heard out of MIOSHA yesterday is that basically we will have to wait until May 24 potentially to hear the answer to that question. So I think many employers heard the news yesterday and they feel like that's good news and maybe are already starting to think about plans to bring employees back or some employees back or hybrids. But the question becomes, do they still need to have a policy, or will they need to have a policy requiring employees to requiring the promotion of remote work? And of course, if you have a policy, don't you have to allow employees to take advantage of that policy? Other things on the table in the permanent rules would be the continuation of these screenings that you have to do every day, the preparedness and response plan, the masking, etc. The concern with this, of course, is situations where the science evolves or the CDC changes its guidelines, particularly related to mask wearing. The situation where 2 employees or more are all fully vaccinated. Under the rules, those employees would continue to need to wear masks in the office, and doesn't really recognize the availability of vaccines in a situation where all employees in the workplace could potentially be vaccinated. The other main concern here is that really, Michigan is one of only 2, well, there's 2 other states that have permanent rules on the books. So there's questions about whether or not we really need permanent rules, especially if we're moving towards mass vaccination and kind of moving towards more of that herd immunity, which of course is kind of questionable. But and just this idea of like, when will this ever end? I think you're seeing states like California and New York that are moving away from COVID restrictions and saying, we are going to fully lift these things on a date certain. We're of course talking about permanent rules. While we've got these milestones with these dates, on the same time on a parallel track, they're talking about permanent rules. So, there are still a lot of questions about whether MIOSHA is going to move forward with these rules as written, or whether or not they will continue to revise or rescind them before or after the public hearing on May 26th. After they have that public hearing, they will be sending the rules to the legislature for the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules. Based on a Supreme Court decision, our Administrative Procedures Act is kind of ineffective in terms of allowing the legislature to fully block those rules. They found some constitutional issues that just have not been able to be resolved. So the legislature can provide input. They can ask MIOSHA to go back and to make revisions to the rules. And they have a number of kind of tools in their toolbox, if you will. But in terms of truly blocking these permanent rules, that would require a signature of a bill by the governor, which of course is doubtful since this is her state department, and arguably she has charged them with this responsibility to develop these rules. So I guess, the long and the short of it is that there's more to be written here. Yesterday was positive news. How we move forward and what this all kind of ends up looking like is still very much in question. I think they're trying to figure it out, meaning the governor's office, as they go. They recognize that these two things do somewhat conflict with each other, but I think there's a hesitancy to withdraw the permanent rules just in case COVID were to take another turn and it comes to be October and there's no workplace rules and no emergency powers, and kind of what happens then. Of course, I think the legislature could be used in that situation to help put something in place, that's temporary in nature and reasonable. But I think there's skepticism that they would be willing to do so. So I'm going to end there, Kara. I don't know if you want to do any questions. I do have
I
time.
actually
So
have 2 questions to
sure.
ask of you that it might help clear up some stuff. So May 24th is when we are supposedly allowed to go back to in-person work. Are there rules right now in place and regulations that we need to, as employers, have in place? So before we had to have our preparedness plans
Yeah.
put together, really looking at that so that we know that we can get that out to our members. Wanted to know that. And also, is there a limitation on capacity in the office? So is it everybody can be in the office again? Or is this, because at 60%, you can have 25% at funerals. So
Yeah.
is there for in office something different?
So no, there's no capacity limits related to offices. You do need to make sure that you're socially distancing and limiting, gatherings around, say, the coffee pot or the water cooler, or the copy machine. So you do need to try to keep people socially distanced, to try to limit the number of gatherings. If people are in common areas, they need to be wearing masks. So there's still those requirements. And in terms of what you need to do if you want to start bringing employees back is I think it's generally advised that you communicate with your employees about your plans sooner rather than later. We know a lot of employees are still having issues with childcare because of the remote learning. There may be other issues going on. You may have people that are hesitant that you want to talk through their concerns and potential issues and try to work out a plan. So I think in general, the feeling is, talk to your employees and see, kind of what you can work through in terms of actually bringing people back. All of those things that have been in place now for months and months and months still apply. So you still need to have your preparedness and response plan. You need to have the person, the safety coordinator on site. You need to do the daily health screenings, the enhanced cleanings, all those sorts of things that have been mandated for months that a lot of offices have never really even put into place because they've been working from home. Those things all still need to be, those things will need to be revisited and will need to be applied. So, that's going to be key. And of course, an employee who has a case, positive case or suspected case, you still need to do the quarantining and the isolation protocols and make sure that you are you're following the book on all this.
Great. A couple questions. What can we do as business owners to show support against permanent MIOSHA rules?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And Kara can send out some information. I assume maybe she already has, or it will be. So there is this public hearing on May 26th. We are, as the Reopen Coalition, working to make the business community's voice heard at that public hearing. We feel like it is very, very important from not only the state hearing from real live employers about the difficulties of these rules and just some of the nonsensical points. And so you can submit written or verbal testimony or comments to MIOSHA on the 26th. Actually, we have a reopen call scheduled for later this week to kind of help further get organized, and that will allow Kara to send out some more things. But if you're interested, we would definitely encourage it. It's one thing for a lobbyist like me to attend and to testify on behalf of my members. It's way more compelling when real business people get involved and make their voices heard.
Absolutely. The next question I have is, has discussion started regarding what happens when the effectiveness of the vaccine expires and we begin to round or begin the round of boosters or annual shots as happens with other vaccines?
Hold on, I want to look at that. What happens?
Sorry.
Okay. Yeah. So, I think this is going to end up being like the flu shot, where every year or we don't know how often, people will need to get revaccinated. But I think the hope is that this becomes, kind of just something that you put on autopilot. Maybe if you're an employer of a certain size, you can even offer the boosters on site. But yeah, I think there are some questions about how that all is going to play out. I think the big focus right now, of course, is just on getting as many people vaccinated as who wish to be vaccinated.
And I would probably want to make mention right now, Wendy, is the federal stimulus for employers that are allowing employees to go get vaccinated on company time. There's a $571 credit for each one of your employees. And it's a huge tax credit. So if you have not looked at that and you are an employer that has allowed time for employees to get vaccinated, you want to make sure that you take advantage of that. And definitely talk to your CPAs in regards to that so that they can get that taken care of for you and your payroll companies and things like that. The last question that I have for you, and I know you've got to run, how are the numbers / percentages going to change with 12 to 15-year-old children able to get vaccinated?
So we don't know the answer to that question at this time. Right now, the state is only counting the vaccination rates of those 16 and older. So they don't count populations that are not currently eligible. But of course, with the announcement, I think it was yesterday, that Pfizer plans to move forward with full approval for vaccines for kids 12 to 15. There does become questions about whether the governor will change those numbers. When it comes to the 55% rate, of course, that doesn't really impact because 12 to 15-year-olds aren't going to the office, right? But they may have a rule about, something related to schools for the fall. I don't know how this plays out. And I think that's going to be a little bit more of a dicey conversation, just because kids in that age range are still developing. Do parents really support getting their kids who may be lower risk or much lower risk vaccinated? Do they think that the benefits outweigh the potential not harms, but something along those lines?
Wendy, thank you so much for coming in and talking about this. As we said, Reopen Michigan, we've been sending out information to our members about how they may be able to testify on May 26th, and we'll keep posting that for folks if you are interested in being a part of that testimonial campaign. Definitely want you to be involved in that. Thank you, Wendy, for always being a wealth of knowledge for us to be able to navigate through all of this. You can find Wendy Block at the Michigan Chamber of Commerce, and you can find her through us, or you can go on to the Michigan Chamber of Commerce website and get Wendy's email and contact information. Thank you so much, Wendy. Greatly appreciate it. And
Thank you.
we'll see you tomorrow at our call.
Thanks.
All right.